chapter 2. It's called The Nike Executive. While Montgomery and his teammates were being abused, with basketball being used as the cover-up for textbook bullying, Megan Carl was being bullied in comparable ways as a leader in basketball for Nike. More precisely, Carl was the vice president and general manager of North America Basketball. Montgomery was in the powerless role of student at his workplace. Carl was in the immensely powerful role of Nike's VP of all North America, and yet they were bullied in similar ways. Both Montgomery and Carl left their beloved worlds of basketball to survive. This painful exit gets turned around by Carl, who uses as the title of her book, Walk Away to Win, and reassigns her exit as a gesture of health and empowerment. It's important not to minimize what they sacrificed, as they both lived and breathed basketball, but reached a point where the abuse they were enduring was putting their safety and sanity at risk. I have found Carl's book to contain the most evocative description of the teachers who harmed Montgomery and the other athletes. Listen to these quotes from her Bully's Manifesto that starts her book. Hear the voice of the abuser speaking to the targets. I know you're smarter, more imaginative, and more courageous than me. And deep down, that's what fuels my quiet rage. I know I'm a lie, and you're the truth. The Dark Triad want to win their internal game more than anything else, and they see others as pawns. They cannot bear those who have talent and integrity. This is a brilliant insight into the Dark Triad, who pour all their energy into being a puppet master who pulls the strings, making some follow them in adoration while others are made to suffer. They will make many happy, but only to torment the few. The Dark Triad are playing a game, getting a psychological boost from manipulation, using their playbook that is all about how to tell lies and get away with it. As Carl expresses it in the voice of the abuser, deceit is my face paint. But at the end of the day, the Dark Triad know they are liars, and their victims are telling the truth. They know they are weak and their targets are strong. Most of all, they pride themselves on power, but they don't even have courage. As the experts show, the Dark Triad have cognitive empathy, so they are painfully aware of exactly what they are doing and the deficits they must cover up. Carl strengthens her insight into what is happening in the bully's brain by once again speaking in his voice, recording his manifesto. Seeing you succeed amplifies my feelings of failure. Seeing you happy reminds me of my own misery. So I blow up whatever bridges I can see you're about to cross. These lines struck me as an apt way to describe the initial shocking blow-up of the one teacher who had positioned himself as mentor, bestower of favors, sender of many texts, offering privileges, praising, and spending one-on-one time shooting hoops with Montgomery, namely the textbook grooming or honeymoon phase. When Montgomery was interacting playfully with a peer, as noted, the teacher screamed at them, "Stop fucking touching each other." Now let's look at this unhinged behavior through Carl's lens. The bully cannot bear the boy's happiness, as it exacerbates his feelings of misery. Just like, as recorded in multiple athletes' testimonies, any athletic success by targets was swiftly punished. Targets could not fathom why the teachers penalized them for their skills and dominance on the court. They reported shooting three-pointers and being benched for it. Not just one player, multiple players in different years. They did not know that for the Dark Triad, who want to win their own inner game, not the actual game involving a team, every time a kid like Montgomery succeeds, the bully's feelings of failure are intensified. One time, When Montgomery had two players boxing him in, he seamlessly slid the ball behind his back to pass it to a teammate who sank the ball. Montgomery got pulled off the court, and the teacher told him, "I don't want to see any of your globetrotter shit." This kind of punishment for playing well was typical. As Carl shows, the way to corrupt and subvert success for the target leads the dark triad to blow up whatever bridges the target is about to cross. For Montgomery, this was a carefully constructed system of blocking him from success at every turn. Same thing for Carl, in a highly sophisticated, goal-oriented company such as Nike. The bully's playbook doesn't change. Why? Because the bully has a mental illness that is as textbook as a chronic illness. Both have symptoms that can lead an expert to a diagnosis. It's just that we rarely look at mental illness in perpetrators, talk about it, or treat it that way. We don't bring in the experts to diagnose it, let alone cure it. We cover it up. Here's another example of blowing up the bridge before Montgomery or the other talented but targeted athletes could cross it. If one of the beneficiaries, with their constant playing time, earned an award, it would be celebrated publicly in front of the whole school. One high-stakes game, Montgomery was allowed off the bench because one of the beneficiaries was injured. They were playing the best team in the league, which ultimately won the championship at the end of the season. With Montgomery allowed to play, his team won that game. Could they have won the championship? No one will ever know because Montgomery was benched for most of the championship games while one of the beneficiaries was missing shot after shot and visibly crying on the court. The teachers would not take him off, regardless of his obvious humiliation. Even the opposing team were demanding that the refs take him off the court. For both teams, it was psychotic. In the earlier tournament where Montgomery was allowed to play, the organizers awarded him an MVP, Most Valuable Player. His teachers couldn't stop him this time from getting the award, but they made sure no one knew. They gave it to him privately. There was no ceremony in front of the school. How was a teenage athlete supposed to understand this behavior? Carl's lived experience, combined with her notable intelligence and ability to articulate complex dynamics, gives voice to this psychosis so that it makes sense. She still couldn't stop it from harming her, sabotaging her career, and infiltrating Nike's culture. Carl's first shock as a target was when she took on her new position as VP and General Manager of North America Basketball. When joining her new team for the very first time at a board meeting, her bully did not even introduce her. So subtle, manipulative, confusing, hard to explain, easy to dismiss as unintentional, a mistake not meant to harm. See the brain working double time to try and turn this microaggression into part of a coherent story? A coherent story that foregrounds a trustworthy, mentally healthy professional with power, credibility, and social standing who makes it almost impossible to recognize simultaneously that a shadowy other figure is at play, who might just be an abusive liar. If Montgomery's teachers wanted to win the championship, it's common sense to put their star player on the court, the kid who earns MVP at a tournament where they beat the powerhouse team that goes on to win the championship at season's end. But after this acknowledgement from the outside of his talent, Montgomery was benched again, game after game. Carl describes this dynamic once again using the bully's voice. "I believe your pain is my gain." Why do bullies inflict pain on their targets? Because for them, it's a win. That's not how healthy brains understand winning, which is why it's so confusing and hard to understand. Blocking an athlete from playing his sport, forcing him to watch his team lose when he knows he could work with them for a win, is agony. Blocking the new VP from her team, shaming her as unworthy, even of an introduction, exposing her to team members who try to understand why she was left in silence and silenced. What's wrong with her? Did she earn the position? Why is she being disrespected right out of the gate? Silence speaks volumes and is one of the most effective weapons in bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity. The psychopath gets a big hit of power and pleasure in creating this kind of pain in targets. And that sadistic pleasure is condoned and enabled over and over again. As we noted, psychological abuse can take a deadly passive form that is at the other end of the spectrum from the active harm done by physical abuse. Pain here was inflicted through omission. The bridge was blown up before Carl could even be introduced. My husband phoned me from Montgomery's championship tournament, and he sounded shocked to the core. He said, "They don't want to win." I couldn't understand why this was so horrifying to him until it dawned on me. If they're coaches and they're blocking their own team from winning, they're blowing up bridges that might lead to success. What's the real game they're playing? What's the agenda? The real game they're playing involves inflicting pain. It's in those moments that you see the psychopathology. It's the game of power and control. It's the game of propping up some to enable hurting others. It's not basketball they're coaching. It's a darker game, played by intra-species predators on the hunt. Not just this time, but always, year after year. Not just at this basketball tournament, but in the office of Nike's VP and general manager of North America basketball. No one is immune. Carl's next insight cuts to the core of what went on in her workplace, just as it did in Montgomery's school. These beliefs are what drive the psychopath bully, not success and a win for the team. Instead, hear the bully's credo. I believe in the magic of demeaning, devaluing, and dehumanizing. I believe in screaming, a smack on the ass, and a creepy whisper. Carl's workplace bullies used a blend of psychological abuse and sexual harassment under the umbrella of misogyny. Women were in the outgroup, which may have created a sense of superiority and provided male bonding for the bullies and boosts of psychotic triumph. Her insight applies to Montgomery's abuse as well, in that it was done by males in positions of power, credibility, and social standing to boys who had no power. The boys were positioned as feminized, which was conveyed as disgusting and pathetic. Misogyny, like all hate, is frequently hammered into targets in their formative years. In Montgomery and the other boys' abuse, the female body was blended with put-downs to express mental inferiority and unworthiness. Quote, fucking pussies, fucking embarrassments, gross some balls, fucking retards, fucking soft, fucking pathetic. The abuse, as documented in multiple testimonies, was a day in, day out barrage of demeaning, devaluing, and dehumanizing directed at teenage targets. They endured screaming, and for Montgomery, it was in his face. The smack on the ass is a normalized basketball player gesture, but it got weird when it was linked with one of the teacher's repeated creepy whispers. The older teacher was always muttering obscenities about the boys. When you have a middle-aged man whispering homophobic slurs, while the boys are given t-shirts emblazoned with names like Montylicious, the screaming and butt slapping all get entwined in creepy, destabilizing ways. The female employees and executives at Nike got organized after Carl set in motion a movement by walking away, and Nike ultimately fired the abusive bullies. In contrast, the Commissioner for Teacher Regulation ruled at Montgomery School that it was the students' fault for listening to the teachers' creepy whispers. The commissioner ruled that when they were exposed to the teachers' obscenities, again, it was their fault for being too sensitive. Now, these are beautiful examples of gaslighting. The commissioner is reversing the terms that result in victim blaming. The perpetrator is not his focus. He does not examine what the perpetrator actively does. Instead, he homes in on the victims and conjures up examples of what is wrong with them. They are not the transmitters of psychological violence. The boys are passive recipients of abuse. The commissioner does not even reach for the straw of insufficient evidence. He has so many students reporting that he has lots of evidence. So he chooses the textbook gaslighting solution, reverse turns, so that the perpetrators are positioned as victims and the victims are the ones faulted, which turns them into perpetrators. The commissioner writes in his reports that it is not the psychopath muttering obscenities that is the issue, but the students who should not have been listening. The psychopath uses the same playbook. Carl exposes the dark triad and their ultimate skill, which is gaslighting. Listen to the voice of the bullying and gaslighting abuser in Carl's Bully Manifesto. I believe in manipulation, exploitation, and Machiavelli. In short, I believe empathy and vulnerability are for losers. The dark triad pour their energy into fluffing up their sheep's clothing so that no one can see the ravenous wolf within. They lean on their position, whether it's doctor, nurse, leader, teacher, manager, coach, professor, entrepreneur, or executive, not to create greatness, but to exploit it. They issue loud prophecies and repeat them over and over to cloud their inherent falsity. They don suits over their scales. They operate with reversals. The essential one is, I am the victim, and those who identify what I'm doing are perpetrators. I launch a smear campaign against those who see through my pontificating and have realized that I'm a false prophet. As I comfortably tell self-serving lies, I exclaim that those who report me are telling nasty lies. They're on a witch hunt. They're trying to hijack my work, my department. They're bullying me. All this posturing as the wrong party is designed to head off any discoveries around the empathy erosion that drives the dark triad brain that manifests as an abusive individual. Empathy and vulnerability are kryptonite for the dark triad, so they play an elaborate game of beneficiaries and targets to avoid them. Let's leave the microcosm of the workplace and look at this phenomenon on a macrocosmic scale. Dr. Gabor Mate brings his psychological insights to help us see that on an emotional level, fascism, as it's driving international trauma in our present world, is also a, quote, desperate escape from vulnerability. He comments on the way children are traumatized in their formative years to show that it is a lack of empathy on the part of caregivers that leads to a fear of vulnerability. Like all mammals, Mate explains, a human baby enters the world with the implicit expectation of being safely held, seen, heard. Imagine homes where the infant does not get held. His needs are not seen. His words fall on deaf ears. Mate sees safety for this child in terms of being physically protected and emotionally nourished. Imagine homes where the child is physically harmed and emotionally malnourished. Mate asserts that it's critically important that the child's feelings are welcomed, recognized, validated, and mirrored. Now imagine this child is being raised with food and shelter, but her feelings are not welcome, not recognized, certainly not validated or mirrored. This traumatizing disconnect can create the psychology that leads to the dark triad that cannot form healthy, empathic relationships, but seeks others to mirror an invulnerably powerful, controlling, coercive, untouchable individual. How do they accomplish this? By positioning beneficiaries as mirrors who aggrandize their superiority, and by positioning targets or enemies as mirrors who reflect their lack of empathy and unlimited power. The targets, the enemies who deserve their maltreatment because they are losers. If they are losers, then the dark triad are winners. That's how the gaslighting mirror works. With fascism, the needs of the majority are not used to outweigh the suffering of the minority. It's just the opposite. The happiness of the few outweighs the suffering of the many. The many losers, the unhappy ones, the targets, the enemies are there to serve the winners. The happy ones, the beneficiaries, the in-group, who live in fear that their leader will cast them into the out-group, and so they fawn and fabricate. Ursula K. Le Guin's short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, depicts the world of winners whose lives are gorgeous beyond belief, but their whole world hinges on the brutal and abject suffering of a single chained child at the heart of their beautiful omelas. Most are so overcome with happiness that they're okay with the suffering of the child. It is only one child, after all, and everyone else is so happy. Le Guin's focus in the story is on those who can't stomach it. They walk away. As Carl shares, having a psychopathic mirror put in front of you, rather than being face to face with an empathic, at times vulnerable individual, reverses your healthy attempts at human connection. The bullying and gaslighting mirror is designed to make you believe that you are the one who is weak, at risk, and mentally ill. Amid being abused, Carl did not even have the term bullying available to apply to her trauma. She describes her declining mental state while being bullied. Quote, "It would mean questioning my values and doubting myself, not just as an employee, but as a human being on the edge of madness. Some might say over the edge, and at my lowest point, putting my family at risk." If an executive of 25 years can be seriously destabilized by abuse, imagine the damaging confusion that occurs in a student's brain. Few of us are trained at work to recognize the manipulations of the dark triad and how at first they mirror us to draw us in, then demand that we mirror them back, aggrandizing their power. All it takes is some initial meetings before the dark triad identify our personal issues and concerns. Quote, "Using this information, the psychopath crafts a simulated persona, a mask, that mirrors or complements these characteristics." The dark triad then share personal and seemingly private insights into themselves that make the target feel heard and seen. They seem to have key issues and concerns in common. The target lets down her guard, and then slowly but surely, this connection evaporates, and the target finds herself ignored and humiliated, which serves to mirror the power, credibility, and social standing of the perpetrator. We examine the dynamic of the dark triad in greater detail in part 2. Carl has spent a 25-year career being acknowledged and promoted for her hard work, her integrity, her brilliance, her expertise. All it takes is a textbook figure from the dark triad to dismantle her brain. His gaslighting and psychological torment are enough to make her doubt herself. The months he has access to her brain are so manipulative that it erases 25 years of experience and excellence in her company. Nonetheless, lawmakers, policy writers, corporate and government leaders do not see the urgency to protect employees from bullying in all forms. They don't seem to recognize that psychological safety is as important as physical safety. Harming the body surely is as serious as harming the brain. Physical illness is as serious as mental illness. Both can lead to intense suffering, ruined careers, loss of livelihood, mental illness, physical illness, and death. Why is one seen as requiring education and protection, whereas the other leaves targets to fend for themselves? This failure in education and training, laws and regulations, institutional compliance designed to deter and prevent the lies of bullying and gaslighting, and the enabling role played by the institutional complicity can lead to an infectious cycle. The once bullied, abused, and neglected who carry the virus are far more likely to be facilitated in spreading the disease to others. It's communicable disease, but it's treated as a moral issue in our outdated system. As Carl puts it, quote, "Bullying is about one person dominating another. It's about dehumanizing, degrading, and devaluing targets. It's about power and control." We can also alter this statement to encompass institutional complicity. Bullying is about the system, political, legal, economic, etc., dominating an outgroup. It's about dehumanizing, degrading, and devaluing targets. Bullying takes myriad forms, but in general, it can be put into the major categories of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, financial abuse, cyberbullying, and social relational bullying. As documented in The Bullied Brain, all forms of bullying can do significant damage to the brain, and the damage can be seen on brain scans. Scientists have at least 20 years of extensive evidence on the impact of bullying on the brain, but this data is not reaching most of the populace. Although workplace protections, laws, and policy do not recognize the significant harm done by bullying that does not touch the body, namely psychological, emotional, cyber, and social relational bullying, perpetrators use it frequently, and their mission is to do damage. As Workplace Bullying Institute co-founder Dr. Gary Nami says, quote, "Workplace bullying is a systemic, laser-focused campaign of interpersonal destruction. We are not legally permitted to physically destroy someone at work. We are legally permitted to psychologically and financially destroy someone. The systemic nature of bullying is well documented, yet we are rarely prepared to be targeted." As Carl says, when she found herself being bullied after 25 years of exceptional service to her company, quote, "It's confusing. It trips us up. It blindsides us." Carl stresses that being able to name what is happening as bullying is a critical first step in self-protection. Quote, "It's so important to understand that bullying is real, has a name, has perpetrators and targets. Why? Because unless you name it, you can't deal with it." In part 3, we harness the neuroscience on naming emotions that puts us into an informed and powerful position regarding bullying, as opposed to being perpetually shocked and destabilized by it. Carl describes her breakthrough session with a mental health counselor. Note the institutionalized reversal. Victims of abuse seek therapy to find out what's wrong with them and how they can get better. Notice how the target is taking responsibility for the trauma that occurred. In contrast, perpetrators do not feel responsible for causing trauma and often disseminate the rumor that the victim's instability or mental illness is why they left the institution. Perpetrators of abuse do not seek therapy because they often believe their own lie that nothing's wrong with them and they have no need to change. What's mind-blowing about this reversal is that institutions frequently support it. Carl feels relief when she hears her mental health counselor, quote, "name the behavior, name what was happening to her." Because she does not trust her own perception of reality due to the bullying and gaslighting, it matters, especially that the counselor is offering a professional opinion. Carl has been faulting herself for not being able to handle a difficult, diminishing boss. When we look in the next chapter at the bullying done to Jonathan Wilson, it's chilling that he suffers this same sense of failure. He thinks being very accomplished, highly promoted, talented, dedicated after 20 plus years, just like Carl, that he is not successful in dealing with difficult people. Those who bully and gaslight aren't difficult. They're deadly. Carl's breakthrough in this session with the counselor, where she discovers accurate language to cut through the lies and name her maltreatment as bullying, makes her feel, quote, "maybe a little less crazy." Note the repetition of the act of naming by the counselor. Hearing her name what was happening to me, and by giving bullying a name, Carl regains what she calls a little bit of control. The fact that a high-powered executive needs to go to a mental health professional to have her experience of maltreatment named as bullying tells us that we need to learn and be trained in how bullying works to distress and destabilize the brain. Carl says knowing that what had happened to her was bullying made her pause long enough to question her belief that she was crazy. That is the overarching goal of gaslighting. Make the targets believe that they're mentally unstable and can no longer trust their assessment of reality. This belief is poison for the brain. As Carl articulates it, quote, "Everything is a test with a bully, and especially with a gaslighter. The bully's reason for being is to push targets towards insanity." Note here that she blends bullying and gaslighting. Those who bully and gaslight test the waters. They are intentional, thoughtful, cautious in how they manipulate. Their goal is to exploit, and they are subtle. Leading another person to lose her mind and become unable to discern between reality and illusion is no simple task. The equivalent of the bully and gaslighter is the pedophile, who uses micro gestures of affection and thoughtful compliments. He offers minor opportunities and benefits. He invests time in the target. All these categories increase slowly but surely, deliberately. He's subtle and patient. It could take years, but with the overarching agenda to exploit, with the game-like fascination abusers experience, it's worth it. What is the result for the target who does not identify the manipulation in time? The target is exploited, mentally destabilized, knocked off her career path, stripped of her livelihood, deprived of her health. As Carl expresses the traumatizing experience, quote, a stressed brain gives a false reading of what's real and what isn't. A stressed brain struggles to perform until it can no longer perform. Extensively documented in scientific studies, chronic or toxic stress that harms targets makes them struggle to tell the truth from a lie, know what's up and what's down, discern between illusion and reality, and thus they can no longer perform. Carl's description here debunks the myth that abuse is a necessary evil for greatness. She was great, but then she was bullied and gaslit, enabled by her institution, into exiting her toxic workplace. We see the identical pattern with other career superstars, Jonathan Wilson and Julia McFarlane. Institutions that want to be successful cannot afford to repeatedly lose their top talent. In workplace cultures that allow the lies of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity, talent, work ethic, leadership are driven out, while perpetrators and the damage they cause are protected. Worried about her sanity and health, Carl sets out on the path to repair and recover. Working with a counselor helps her on this journey. Although this is a normalized pattern in our society, note how backward it all is. Why do companies sacrifice their talent to abusers? Why does the victim need counseling from a mental health expert, but the perpetrator is positioned as stable and healthy? Why doesn't a high-level executive such as Carl not instantly recognize and name what she's dealing with and then tackle it? Why does she have to walk away to win? It seems minor, but much of this chaos hinges on language. Words are part of the key to unlocking answers to these puzzling questions. Look at the way Carl describes the remedy to gaslighting that comes from the counselor, naming the bullying. Quote, I just felt validated, maybe a little less crazy. In many ways, Carl's crisis is a crisis of language. How is it possible that a highly sophisticated, successful executive resorts to almost childlike language, crazy, to describe what is being done to her? I am hyper aware of this language breakdown because it is what led me astray with my son, Montgomery, when he and other students were being bullied by teachers. After the other victims had reported the pattern of abuse, making it explicit, I asked him why he didn't tell me what was happening. He looked me in the eye and he said, I did tell you. Then he repeated the phrases, I hate those guys. They're freaks. Note the childlike language. He did not have the correct vocabulary to describe the abuse being done to him. I have felt painfully responsible as a parent for not teaching him how to properly articulate and narrate abuse to which he might be subjected. But when I read powerhouse Megan Carl, VP of North America Basketball, I recognize that the issue is far bigger. Few of us, perhaps only the mental health professionals, have the correct language to describe and document bullying in all its insidious and explosive forms. A major focus of the Gaslit Brain is to build an effective operating vocabulary from psychological research to better identify and expose the lies of bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity. Our sanity hangs in the balance. We don't want to believe inaccurately that we are crazy and that the toxic environment we are in is healthy. This false reading by a stressed brain happens all too often. Learning how to name bullying can't be something we do in a workshop or as a quick overview of policy and procedure at the start of the fiscal year. It needs to be taught over and over, identified immediately when it occurs, be summarily shut down by witnesses, and addressed effectively by leaders, managers, and HR. When we look at the prevalence of workplace bullying, which has affected almost 80 million US workers, according to a 2021 survey by the Workplace Bullying Institute, it's amazing that this highly destructive yet preventable behavior is not abruptly stopped, and even more amazing, is frequently enabled. 1 in 2 workers are targets of bullying, and 1 in 3 reports it. And yet, as the Workplace Bullying Institute states, quote, workplace bullying remains the undiscussable. You can't discuss something that either has no name outside of mental health expertise or is expressed by inaccurate language like freaks, hate, crazy. These words need to be replaced with psychologically informed vocabulary that is a requirement to know for employees and certainly for leaders, managers, and HR. Megan Carl's crazy becomes the bullying, gaslighting, and institutional complicity I am faced with is dismantling my 25 years of exceptional work and repeat promotions, which have earned me one of the most significant positions of responsibility and leadership at Nike. Instead of being able to contribute my expertise, I'm being systemically attacked on a brain level. I'm enduring psychological violence that is so harmful, it's causing my brain to focus on threat and survival rather than all the creative, important, vital work I need to do in my position. As Carl puts it, and the injustice and cruelty are aptly conveyed. Quote, the thing about workplace bullying is that it shatters what you know to be true. You start questioning your entire belief system. Imagine being a top-level executive, and instead of doing your demanding work, you're reduced to questioning what's real and what's false, what's a lie and what's the truth. In the next chapter, we hear Jonathan Wilson, as a counter-terrorism expert for Scotland Yard with a law degree, describe a comparable collapse in his brain's way of working. This shattering is the legacy of enabled bullying and gaslighting in the workplace. Nike ultimately ousted the perpetrators, but how much damage to other targets had already occurred? There is a great deal more vocabulary we need to learn and have at the ready if we truly want to transform workplaces that normalize and enable bullying and gaslighting into work environments that normalize and enable speaking up and transparency. Let us return to Gabor Mate's insights into the abuse and neglect that can create the dark triad. As the world tilts ominously back towards fascist regimes, he exposes the simple failure of child rearing that drives this dangerous impulse that becomes a plan to find an outgroup, label them enemy, demean, dehumanize, and destroy them. Leaders gaze upon the populace as strongmen and demand their power be mirrored back to them as if they are national, even religious saviors. It's remarkable that we find it so incredibly difficult to stop this same tired old playbook that fuels bullying and abuse in the home, the workplace, and in international politics. This is Gabor Mate. Quote, the human infant enters the world with the implicit expectation of being safely held, seen, heard, physically protected, and emotionally nourished. Her feelings welcomed, recognized, validated, and mirrored. Given such an evolved nest, in the apt phrase of the psychologist Darcia Navarez, we develop and maintain a strong connection to ourselves, a deeply rooted confidence in who we are, a trust in innate goodness present in the world, and an openness to love within ourselves as without. Trauma represents a disconnect from these healthy inclinations. In extreme cases, a defensive denial of them as being too vulnerable to bear. And that, in essence, is what fascism is, on the emotional level, a desperate escape from vulnerability. Neuroscientist Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen, whose research we will look at in detail in part 2, cannot fathom why we don't train and teach affective empathy at every stage from childhood to adulthood. Mate's life's work has been to do just that, and yet here we are. What will it take to put in place preventative measures and focus upstream on parenting, teaching, and coaching? Why do we bemoan the rise of populism, far-right demonizing of others, and fascism when we know that it's so often tied to a traumatic upbringing? Why not change how caretakers are educated and children are raised? Why allow whole swaths of the population to be dehumanized and degraded in their work, blocked from opportunities, so that they must cover up their vulnerability and their family's vulnerability with grandiose gestures and a need to identify targets to blame? The blame goes to the target group, not to the higher-ups, who are enablers of these unbearable conditions where opportunities for fair wages, decent workplaces, safety, and health are too often bridges blown up before they can be crossed. Carl couldn't have been bullied out of her position at Nike if parents had raised the men with whom she worked to feel safe, held, seen, heard, physically protected, and emotionally nourished. Their feelings welcomed, recognized, validated, and mirrored. Likewise for Wilson and McFarland. The tragedy of the dark triad is their endless hunt for mirroring. They didn't get it in childhood, and that lack is deeply traumatic. To compensate, they make others mirror their conquering potency. Think misogyny, homophobia, sexual harassment, sexual assault, and their winning confidence. Think humiliation, berating, threatening, punishing, blocking from opportunities, public shaming. Gazing into this mirror where the losers make them feel like winners, they can avoid acknowledging or feeling their eroded power and confidence. It does not matter to them that this mirror reflects nothing but falsehoods. In October 1928, before fascism took hold of Europe, Virginia Woolf gave a lecture at Cambridge University on women and writing. She spoke about how women in fiction and in life were expected to hold a mirror up to men to aggrandize them. She imagines that men aren't focused on female inferiority per se. Rather, they're concerned about establishing and protecting their own superiority. They have a fragile self-image, like glass, that could easily be shattered. Almost a century later, Meghan Carl is suffocating in a workplace where misogyny has drained it of oxygen. The colleague who bullies her and the executives she thought she could trust, who turned their backs when she asked for help, position her as a mirror that reflects back to them their power to ignore her, demean her, conduct business as if she's nothing, a nobody. She describes the impact of this treatment on her. Quote, "By this time I'd said goodbye to Nike. The key people I reported to didn't see me at all. And frankly, I no longer saw myself. When I looked in the mirror, it was blank, nothing, invisible." When we go to work and instead of being in a healthy workplace, we find ourselves lost in a hall of mirrors, the impact is deeply concerning. If we are targeted by someone who is in the dark triad, they can turn us into a mirror that reflects their psychological needs. When they feel small, we must reflect them back supersized. When they feel self-loathing, we must reflect them as adored. When they feel like a loser, we must show them that they are winners. When they feel degraded, we must make them feel divine. When they feel rejected, we must reflect back to them their virility. When they feel impotent, we must reflect back to them their unlimited power. All this reflecting is not only disorientating, not only does it take us to the brink where we forget how to distinguish between truth and illusion, but we might just lose our own selves so that when we look in the mirror, nothing is there.